Just a word of warning. Zoom has been really glitchy for the last few weeks for us. So if at any point in time I leave the meeting and my screen share stops, it's because Zoom has gone completely white and I can hear all of you, but I can't control anything or do anything. It's happened to me on my last 3 meetings, and it's happened to a couple of other hosts on their meetings. So
I like the formulation that it's you specifically, Lauren, and I'm just going to go with that. Lauren, do you have my cell?
I do.
Yeah, so just shoot me a text or something. We'll figure
Will
it out.
do.
Okay, can you make me co-host? That way, if you fade out, the meeting continues.
Yes.
Why don't you do that? That way, at least then if we both go out, ugh, but we can at least give it a shot, and then you can rejoin. Oh, it says I am host.
Yep.
So am I now host or am I co-hosting with you?
I can take it back from you at any point in time.
All right.
So right now,
and
it's
remember
you.
that, Joe.
Yeah, exactly. All right, Lauren's really the scariest person here. Let's just be honest, We've lost Liz again. I can't help but notice, maybe you guys have experienced this also, that whatever webbing platform I've been using went weird as soon as school reopened, which makes me think the demands are such that like everything felt that it was really solid over the summer, everything. And then next thing I knew, it went over. Yeah. Okay. So Lauren, do we have anybody aside from hopefully Liz waiting for us in the waiting room?
There is no one.
All right. So then I think our next mission is the minutes. I confess that I did not review the minutes because I didn't think about it. Do we have any thought? Thanks for the hand waving. Do we have any thoughts on the minutes?
I'll make a motion that we approve the minutes as sent.
Doreen, I think you consistently always made our motion. I appreciate it. All in favor with a hand wave? Okay.
I think Liz is part of the attendees.
Yeah, I'm trying to move her again and it's not letting me. Or she's got to accept the move.
Got it.
Right. So if that's the case, then we've done public comment, we've done minutes. Why don't we wait a second, see if we can get Liz, and then we'll do the document review. One thing I wanted to mention, I have been, one of the joys of not being on an active board is I don't necessarily read the paper every single time it comes out, but I did catch a couple of articles on the charter review that look like they were, Liz says, by the way, she doesn't see where to accept. Lauren.
Yeah, I'm not sure what's going on, Liz, why it's making you wait. I'm resending you your specific link. So if you check your email, Liz, you should be able to try to come in with your panelist link, so it won't need to move you over.
Yeah, I was going to suggest something similar. So if I understood the reading the things in the paper, at least the comment was mostly about the town manager. My feeling on that matter is that while we haven't come to a decision, my sense of everyone is, since we're developing a charter that doesn't anticipate a town manager, where it's just not something that we're moving toward at the moment, but we've never voted to reject it. My feeling is that probably what we should do is continue on this path until the public hearing. But I wanted to kind of open it for discussion in case anyone was harboring a different thought.
I guess my thought is that part of due diligence for this charter is that we should not have the default that, well, things haven't been, things haven't fallen apart, so therefore the basic structure shouldn't be even examined. So I think we should take a hard look at going to a manager system because there certainly are a number of citizens who strongly support that, and a number who strongly oppose it also. We should also look and take a solid look at the representative town meeting as a alternative. And a third is that we should also take a look at, keeping the first select woman or whatever we decide to call it, but also hire a town administrator, kind of a tweener between the management system, that we should at least take a solid look at those.
Yeah. So I guess,
go ahead.
Yeah, I guess
2 cents.
I'm in agreement with that. I guess my comments, maybe I didn't frame them up right, are like administrative. So in order, my feeling is finish doing what we're doing. Because
Yes.
I think there's going to time when we're done what we're doing, and then there's a Lauren and Ira time to follow to integrate that, answer the questions we have. And in that interim, we can sort of have broader policy discussions and maybe even highlight a couple from what we have. Some of the policy questions that we have even dangling from this, and we could explore it then, we could decide, but I don't particularly think the commission should vote to reject or accept until we have the public hearing.
I would agree with that.
So same here, yeah.
And I just like to add, I think we've started our due diligence with just the people we've interviewed.
Yeah.
And just address some of these issues, and we'll continue to do it.
Yeah, I think I may have mentioned I have a couple of people I wouldn't mind bringing in when we talk about this. Some from Mansfield. I know, Noreen, you had some people you had in mind. I actually just had an absolute accidental conversation about this with someone from someone I know very well from a town in Massachusetts, currently nameless, that may have some interesting insight from just not so much the legal structure as much as the personnel management side. But we could structure those things. But again, my thought is proceed along this basis, because that's the thing we've been doing. Complete it, take that interim phase. We can look at a couple of things and then advance it at the town meeting. I'd also like to be in a position to talk about it a little more intelligently when we have our open meeting. We've done some initial steps, but I think there's at least more for me to learn.
Joe, when you brought up the press, Gus Horvath wrote a letter about a month ago, and Joan most likely will understand this better than I, but he sort of says that, and I know this isn't true, that the town voted to change to town manager and the selectmen didn't do it. I was kind of surprised. I was confused by his letter. And I'm wondering if he understood really what happened last time. I know some things were rejected, but I don't remember ever. First of all, nothing was broken down. It was all just one vote, as I recall. But he sort of implies that the voters have voted for the town manager and we haven't moved on it. But I don't believe that's ever happened.
I think, but he's because I saw that letter also. I think that he's inferring that because the last update was rejected, that means then that people wanted something else. I think it's more of an inference than a vote.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. That the suggestion was reading an inference that I'm not sure was obvious to me about the rejection of the prior town charter, but at least he's trying to say they rejected it for a reason. Maybe this was this. Yeah, well, I was referring to the same letter too, Noreen. That's
I
the one I caught.
Remember though, one of the controversial things was extended voting. I mean, in this day of COVID and absentee ballots all sort of gone away, but there was something about voting for 3 or 4 days afterwards or something. But my question is, was it in the proposal that was voted on? I know that extended voting was.
There was a breakout. There was a breakout that the first selectman would become more of a CEO and there would be a COO. And in the future, there could be delegation away from the first selectman to the chief operating officer, and gave a very detailed move. I don't think it was the extended town meeting. I think it was the Board of Finance piece that sunk it, because there was a concerted effort to politically to kill it because of the balancing of the Board of Finance.
What was the issue? What was the issue that they wanted to kill it?
Board of Finance, it was the Board of Selectmen. If the Board of Selectmen wanted a special appropriation or bring something to the referendum, right now, the Board of Finance has final say whether or not it goes, period. And what the charter said was that there would be a town meeting, and if there wasn't a quorum, the Board of Finance's decision would rule. And if there is a quorum, it would be the meeting would take place to determine whether or not it would go to referendum. That was.
I'm under the impression that Joan's correct, that it was the changing of the financing structure seemed to be the thing that got more attention. I
Yeah.
don't think anyone was focused on that. And I would also argue, and Joan, feel free to give me your thoughts, but that the direction, the conversation we've been having in recent weeks, that the charter should not be in the way of how a first selectman structures their government is kind of consistent, less precise, but kind of consistent with what Joan was talking about under the last charter, though it's a little bit in the rearview mirror. That's how I recall it.
Yeah. Yep. Okay.
All right.
So,
well, good.
You know,
Thank you.
Yeah. So, Lauren, if that being said, if you wouldn't mind doing the magic screen share thing, which I think is efficient, my hope is that we can maybe, if not cross the finish line, have it in sights.
Can everyone see?
Yes.
yes.
Okay. I'm still here.
great.
Excellent.
Trying to get us back.
And we
to where
appreciate
we
that.
were.
Okay. So one of the things we talked about was verifying that which all the elected boards have a little bit more detail, would you say?
Yeah. I think the point was that we're right about where we left, to make sure that when people come onto these boards, they can look at the charter and have a sense as to what it is they think they're going to be doing, which I have a fair amount of sympathy with. Does that sound right?
Yes.
But everything in this charter, with the exception of the Conservation Commission, hardly tells any committee what they're doing other than the Board of Finance and the Board of Selectmen.
Well, and I think even in those cases that we could be well served to do a little expansion.
Okay.
All right.
I
So-
agree.
Where would we like to start? So where do we end off exactly? Are we stuck in elective boards? Is this as far as we got?
Yeah. We got to looks like we got to Board of Finance.
Yeah, we ended there.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm sorry, I'm still looking at, oh, okay, there we go. I'm still looking at Zoning Board of Appeals. I mean, some of them are fairly straightforward. Go look at the statute, it tells you.
Right, and I think we can't change that, because if the state changes the statute, then we're just going to be out of sync, then, right?
Right.
Same thing with,
Look, there are certain things, I mean, we could do if we wanted to. If I thought Board of Ed had a problem with their members not knowing what to do, you can put in, this is the primary education policy board, blah, 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 blah. However, as described in state statute, which is controlling. I mean, we could do that. I just think that we'd be solving a problem that doesn't exist for certain boards.
Right.
The Board of Finance and Board of Selectmen seem to be our issue.
okay.
Does that, that's how it appears to me. I'm happy to be wrong.
Okay, so Board of Finance, do we want to go to 7 members or do we want to go down to 5? My thought is if we do 5, then I would think we'd want both Board of Finance and Board of Selectmen to be on the same timing. Or not. I don't know. I mean, it's if we go up to 7, then you're definitely having a split. I don't think you'd do, well, I guess you could do 7 in 1 year.
Yeah, my feeling is, I think that if I find larger boards to be a little less, less likely to polarize. So I know that when I was chairing planning and zoning, which was 9 members, you always have arguments and you have split votes, but you tended to get, there's just a little more room that any one person's particular issue is less sensitive. And also Board of Finance, the liaison duties, which I know are very, onerous on members. Board of Finance can do that a little, tends to get a little more involved around budget time. And I could see where 7 members would be helpful. As a former Board of Finance chairman, I'd be delighted with a 6-member board and then let the chair decide to decide the tie break.
Well, that's what we have right now, right?
No.
No,
Isn't-
if they tie, the proposal is rejected.
No, but don't we have 6 people on the Board of Finance?
We do.
Right, so
We
I
do.
mean.
So the question is,
So the chairmanship, if they can't decide, which they normally do, the only time I remember it happening once, that it went to the Board of Selectmen.
no, the only thing that goes to the board is, the only thing that goes to the Board of Selectmen on a tie like that is the vote for the chairmanship.
Right,
But regular votes would decline. The one thing though that I would argue that argues for an odd number is then if I knew that my board was going to tie, then the question is, what question do I put before them? You can reverse the polarity of the question. So it strikes me that it's fair to have an odd number.
Yeah, I mean, otherwise you're constantly, if you're not tied, you're in a super majority, which then rolls things through. So
Yeah.
Now the
Though as a
question becomes, do we split the timing of their election, or do all 7 go at the same time at the Board of Selectmen, since we're going to 4 years there?
I think I would split. Right now we do it every 2 years, right? We stagger the term. So, and I think it's 4 and 2 as we're currently doing it, isn't it?
The Board of
Yes.
Finance is 4
Yes.
right now.
Yeah, it's
Yep.
4 and 2. So I would leave it every 2 years and do it, 3
Actually,
and 4.
It's not 4 and 2, it's 3 and 3
Is it 3 and 3?
every 2 years. Yeah, because there's 3 people that are not running for office, and there are 3 people that, there's 3 open slots.
But you when you win a term for 4 years.
Correct.
Right.
I'm talking about the staggering of the election or not. Do we stagger this board, or do we? I mean, the reason that it was staggered originally was because of the 3 and 3. So
Does the Board of Education has staggered, right?
Yeah, they're 9 members.
They're out already, but they've staggered terms.
They're not. Yep, they're the 9 members as well.
I would stagger them. That because if there's any board where you want continuity from board to board, it's Board of Finance. It's
Agreed.
technical. There's memory associated with the budgeting. There are obligations of finance that are easy to forget. I'm reminded of a time when there was what seemed like a simple thing about relieving a reserve for changing a roadway because of the DEP that the selectmen suggested. They had forgotten that was not an optional expense. That was a commitment to the state, so I would stagger.
Okay.
I would agree about staggering too. How would we stagger though? Would this be 4 and 3?
Yep.
Okay.
So the initial one after the passing of this would be 4, so that it would bring the board up to the 7.
Right. Oh, right. Perfect. Exactly right. The
Okay.
following, yeah. That way it's painless. I was just thinking, I was thinking we'd have to make somebody have an artificial 2-year term, but you're absolutely right. We don't have to. The next election would just be for 4.
Joe, can I just ask you, something happens on the Board of Education because I don't know how many people, but there's a certain group that when they run, every time they run unopposed, there's no opportunity for movement. And I think if there's some way we could avoid that happening, because I think people want choice, but we have it now. I mean, there's people that get on the Board of Education that never, ever, once they get on, never have a competition ever again when they run again. Because I think it's every other year, every 2 years, I think it's every 2 years, no seats can change parties.
So
And I
once
don't know
the,
why that happened.
right, so
I think it's the minority representation rules.
right, so the same thing's going to happen here, just so we're all aware. Once you've got 7, when the 3, so that, absolutely right, Noreen. So there's 9, right? So this time around, there's 5 seats, I believe, right? once those 5 seats are held, and if there's a 1-person majority, then you can't go any further than that 1-person extra majority. The people who are the 4-4, the next round, you can only elect 4 people,
So it takes 4.
or 2 and 2.
So it changed, even though the elections were held every 2 years because we stagger, the
Right.
change in majority party or minority party doesn't change every 4. It takes every 4 years, not every 2 years.
It could, if the minority party chose to run, rather than 2 people, they ran 3 to try to gain that extra 1. So it could, it just usually doesn't.
Right. If you had
Well-
4 Republicans in place and the next 3 slots came in and it was 1 Republican and 2 Democrats, then the 2 Democrats will definitely win. And then their question is, do they challenge to gain the extra seat?
But I think there's people on Board of Ed that have a term that is never challenged and can't be. I don't think
No,
it's a choice. It's a
Why
choice.
can't it
it's-
be?
It's not that it can't be. The minority party has chosen not to try to gain that seat in that year.
Yeah, there's a practical problem.
I don't think I think there's an impossible, even if you want to put more people up, it doesn't matter. This year we can. But I remember, I think it's every
2
4
years ago, it could have flipped as well.
Yeah, I don't think there's
You had to
never
run more people.
Yeah, there's never a problem of somebody can't be opposed. There's a question on that, just for our, I don't think we've talked about it in this panel. The minority representation rules don't ensure that a particular party gets seats in the minority. What it stops is that the majority party can't control all the seats.
Right.
So on a 7-member board, it would mean that 2 seats, Joan, or 3 would always have to be held by a non-majority party. Is it
I
2 or
think
3?
it's 3 on
I
a
think-
7. I'll double check that
Yeah.
right now, actually.
So
You guys
that
keep talking.
so that way, so if we have a massive Democratic wave or Republican wave, you can't run the table on all the boards into single party rule. That does not mean then the other seats. So if you have Republicans controlling the board, that doesn't mean that the other seats are necessarily controlled by Democrats. You could have the
But
Green
they're-
Party, the Connecticut Party,
Right.
the
Conservatives.
Charter Review Party, could come and do it. But it's they're called minority representation, but they're really a minority limitation, a majority limitation rule.
So just to boil it down.
Please.
So, let's say worst case scenario, let's say, the first year, 4 people are up for election, and then the following time, 3 people are up.
Yeah.
If the 4 people voted in happen to be of the same party, let's say they're all Republicans,
Yeah.
then the following election, none of those 3 elected can be Republicans.
So
No, it's staggered. That'll never happen. You'll never have, for 4 seats, have one party get all 4 seats, not the way we stagger them.
Well, so let me set it up so I think to your concerns. So let's assume for a second that the 3 people who are up are Republicans, right? Coming up, and if we had a 3-3 party and it worked out that 3, and it's very hard to get it this way, but the three Democrats were up for election and they picked up 1 extra seat. So now they're 4. The next election, there could be no Democrats voted in. Right.
But Joe, I never remember an election that we didn't have both parties running.
I don't think that we do, because think about it. You could, well, under that case, you couldn't have a seat coming in. On the other hand, if Noreen, if a crafty political party chairman could suddenly then run someone in on the conservative party, I mean, there's always a way to do it. You just can't have a single party running.
Right.
That would explain why the Board of Ed, if the Board of Ed has the same rules, that would explain why every other year, whatever number runs unopposed. Is that what Noreen's talking about?
Well, they wouldn't run unopposed, because if you think about it, yeah, I mean, I think that's what's driving the reason that parties may not come through. As a practical matter, I believe it's always been that in every election we ended up with people from both parties in the tranches of the 4s, the 3s, the 6s, the 5s, those kind of things.
Mhm.
So that's
Well,
like
you
this
can-
year, right? On the Board of Education. So there's 5 seats, correct me if I'm wrong, 5 seats, and there's actually 6 people running, 3 Democrat, 3 Republicans. So we know that 2 Democrats are going to get in, 2 Republicans are going to get in, but it's that one swing
Right.
seat
Bingo.
that, right.
And
But I'm with David. So Joe, thanks for,
Go ahead, Matt.
I was going to say, thanks for laying it out, the concept or the theory behind it, because I was struggling to.
Right.
Well, it's a whole majority rule, but I'll tell you, I believe, and Lauren, you can check this out, that the challenge year in the Board of Ed only happens every 4 years. There's no change. Whatever parties takes over this year, we'll have it for 4 years. I could be wrong, but I'm almost positive that's the way it's set up. I don't know why it is, but I think that's set up that way.
It isn't. Actually, I was kind of shocked 2 years ago that it was an unopposed election. Because I looked into it 2 years ago. So anyway, just so we know, I just want to say something about this. So the Board of Education has a requirement for the maximum under the same party with 9 is 5, just so we know.
Majority, right.
Majority. However, minority representation in others, which would be the Board of Finance, unless the town enacts a greater degree of minority representation, if it's a 7-member board, then 5 can be of the majority. And I think the whole idea behind this is to get away from that supermajority so we can put in the charter 7 with a minority representation of 3.
Oh, well, to my mind, that with a minority representation of 3. So we can balance the minority representation rules. So it's not a 2-5, but a 4-3.
Correct.
Right.
And I think we should, because that's one of the things, that's the reason we were discussing this to begin with, was because of the trying to keep the balancing and people working,
I confess to be so torn about that. Like there's a little libertarian streak somewhere down deep in me that's like, why should we do this at all? But the practicality, I know, Joan,
No, I mean,
the
no,
practical
but it is.
effect
I
of
mean,
it is
right
there.
now, that board could flip from 4 Republicans to 4 Democrats in this election year.
That's right.
So I think that getting it to 7 with a 4-3, and once again, then the Democrats would have a supermajority. And that's, we want this to not necessarily, I think the way the Board of Ed works is great because there is a minority, that's just a 1-person change. And the same thing with Board of Selectmen. So I think we should kind of try to follow that with our Board of Finance as well.
I guess I'm still stuck with the idea that irrespective of party and frankly, having sat on there were many, I think, surprising coalitions in my time on the Board of Finance that were not easily predictable by the letter following the name, that I'd rather err on the side of staggering it so you have managerial continuity of expertise, which is what 90% of the arguments are about anyway.
But I think we reference in the Board of Selectmen, we reference, correct me if I'm wrong, that it needs to be only 3 from the majority party, where in state statute, there could be 4. So I think we got to be, to me, I want to be consistent along the boards then.
All right, well, let me think that through on the Board of Selectmen, but I think you're right. But let me, you know what I mean? Let we get to the Board.
Well, no,
of
it's,
Selectmen,
I have the it up, the representation
right.
requirements.
Yeah.
While you're looking for that, out of curiosity, for the Board of Finance historically, there's 3 elected per year. How many people run historically?
Oh, actually, it's when 5 members, and so there can be no more than 3. That's part of the state statute as well.
Oh,
So.
by the way, I want to let everyone know I received a text from Lauren. She's lost her ability to be part of the meeting again. I think at this point in time, we should make a lot of half-baked decisions that she has to deal with later. There's nothing she can do with about it. She did want to put on the record that you need to put in a maximum of majority in party and not a minimum of any one party,
Right.
just as a correction, so that that's the power that we have.
Majority party.
Yeah, because that's the confusing flip of the
Okay, so there
misnomer.
could be no more than 3 members of the same party for the Board of Selectmen when there's 5 members. And then there can be no more than 4 members of the majority party for the 7-member Board of Finance?
Well, that's what we have now. It's 4 is the majority now. And
Yeah, but we have 6 members right now.
I wonder what the reason was for that one board to be an even number compared to the other 2 boards. I wonder if anybody.
I have a thought, but it's very cynical.
Well, that usually doesn't stop you, Joan, so why now?
So it's a way to keep a super majority for a long time. If you only have 6.
But why would you have it different on one board from your whole town? Why hasn't this come up in a charter review before? It's pretty surprising.
Well,
We've lost the document, by the way, folks.
Yeah, I assume that's because of Lauren sharing. Lauren, since I'm host, what I would recommend is if you want to leave and then return, maybe hopefully our meeting will still stay in put. So
Yeah.
you guys, excuse me, I'm just going to text her and see if we can get our document back. So hang tight.
I still love that picture of Joe that he puts up when he's. Oh. Yep,
Oh, there she
we
is.
see Lauren.
Okay, I'm back
Well,
for
Okay.
now.
this is the best screen ever. I have multiple Laurens.
Yeah, I know.
Right,
It's
it's
all my
very cool.
personality
You're-
came to the meeting.
You're both Greg and Bobby Brady on my screen.
Oh, Joe, too much.
You're the 2 little ones on my screen. Oh,
Yeah,
who do
there
we
we go.
lose? There we go.
All right, so
Yeah.
I did pass on your comments, Lauren, on the expressing this in terms of majority versus minority.
Perfect. And I had started making that change, and obviously you guys weren't able to see me making the change on the screen because I also had to close everything down. So I did put that in here, no more than 4 members from any one party.
Okay, and term shall be staggered with the initial term following the passing of the charter to extend to 4 members. Yes. Do we say extend to 7 members total or 4 members?
Get to see both.
Right. Or 4 of the 7. I mean, you're going to have to hand this language to Ira anyway,
Right.
right?
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, okay, got it.
Okay. With our newly restored, so it's too bad, Lauren. I felt we had free reign to pass over a lot of things. We're going to offer free beer from town hall. We were doing a lot of things.
I could still hear you.
Oh,
Okay.
hey, you know what? That's all the better. That would have been more
Yes.
fun.
Oh, okay.
Right. So where to next in Board of Finance?
Regular town election, first regular scheduled meeting, chairman, yep.
So this note here is just that this is applicable to all boards and commissions, not just the Board of Finance. And then again, Ira questioned this comment that we have the next sentence about the Freedom of Information Act. All boards and commissions follow FOI. So again, we're not really sure why someone felt this was specific to like making sure it was in here for the Board of Finance.
Given the nature of FOIA, I would completely pull that.
Yeah.
You know, because A, FOIA could change. B, since FOIA actions tend to be somewhat contentious, I would rather just let state statute control and not have some complicating language.
And I don't think we need to mention quorum now either, because we now have the odd number. That would just be a regular quorum is the majority, correct?
Yeah.
Oh, look at us. We're saving words.
Actually, yeah. And then I'm just going to highlight this for myself. I'll go back and put it at the beginning of the section.
Okay.
Okay, now we're into the fun stuff. So one question I have right off the bat
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
is the the preparation of the town budget.
No,
Yeah, the Board of
Yeah.
Finance does not prepare the town budget. Oh, I'm sorry, Bob, I didn't see your hand.
No, I have maybe the same. I'll let you guys who are more knowledgeable. I was shocked when I read A.
Yeah, it's also just not true. The Board of Finance hosts the budget process meetings, but they receive a budget from each of the divisions. The first selectman, it's part of their job.
Yeah, that was my understanding. So, yeah.
Well, you know what, but Joe, the thing here is they don't prepare. You're exactly right. Board of Ed does, and the superintendent does, and first selectman and the whole Board of Selectmen do. But it is the second part of that, that they are the budget authority is so important, because I think that gets lost. But they do prepare the final budget that goes to vote.
So I guess the
Say
way,
that.
yeah, the way that I believe they function, the way to me is they receive the town budgets and they prepare the consolidated budget for presentation. They prepare and, it's not just prepare, right? They prepare and deliver the consolidated budget for presentation to the voters.
To referendum.
Yeah. That they oversee the budget they're the lead authority overseeing the budget process, which includes receipt of budget proposals from the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Ed, creation of a consolidated town budget, and presentation to the voters. Like, that's the process, as I think expressed correctly.
My 2 cents is that when I read preparation of the budget, I'm thinking, gee, I'm on the Board of Finance. And I'm thinking, we're a peace-loving community and we get along. So why don't we lower the police budget to $5,000?
Yeah. Well, so the reality is the Board of Finance ultimately can do that, but I think the thing you're catching is that how does it actually work? The chief of police sits in front of you with his presentation for his budget. He puts the budget together. The A would give you the impression that the Board of Finance could just do it on their own without asking anyone, which would be a confusing world. It doesn't happen in practice, and I don't think the charter should say so.
right. They can obviously, they don't just present the budget to the voters. They
shape it.
They have the ability to modify it. How does that sound as well?
My understanding is that the policy initiative is in the hands of the Board of Selectmen.
You can't modify what's in the hands of the Board of Selectmen?
The policy initiative.
The policy initiative is basically, that's where that responsibility sits. And the Board of Finance then looks at it and says, wait a second, this is crazy. We can't afford so-and-so, or it may not be my particular choices on policy terms, but it is affordable. So we move forward.
But I think that, yeah, I think that that's where the bone of contention lies. So maybe modify, maybe
make adjustments, make necessary.
Well, I don't know if we want to. So I think one of the problems right now is the line item adjustment issue versus just vote on recommendations for full cuts. You know what I mean? So for the Board of Ed, they say, okay, we're going to take your budget and it's going to be less $100,000. And here's the reasons why. For the Board of Selectmen, they go, okay, here's your budget. Okay, but we don't think the road should need that much money. So we're cutting that. We don't need this is cutting that. We're cutting that. So I think that if we can get the Board of Finance to act towards the the town's budget like they act towards the Board of Education budget, that friction may reduce, because it's like, okay, town, we're reducing it by 100,000. You guys, Board of Selectmen, figure out where you want to take that from.
Yeah, Joan, I totally agree that has been an issue in the past.
Yeah, my concern about that, though, is a couple of things. I mean, one, that the Board of Ed has a separate requirement being able to pay for things, but it's the town that creates reserves. And to be perfectly honest, I've not always experienced the world's greatest safeguarding of reserves on behalf of our boards, where the Board of Finance has the ability to say, no, put more away for the fire truck, where that's not an issue with the Board of Ed because they don't keep reserves. Instead, the town does. So
Maybe we break it up as operating budgets get a cut and reserves are something that can be added to or subtracted from specifically by the Board of Finance.
So my second category is that operationally, we need adequate resources for fiscal management, right? So it would be then, how do you ensure, since the Board of Finance doesn't necessarily control personnel, right? Although maybe some of my predecessors once upon a time tried, you'd want to make sure that they didn't defund the town CFO, cut back on the secondary accounts. There's a lot of operational stuff that goes with ensuring the town finances are well safeguarded. And the problem with that is, how do you separate that from saying, I disagree with you on the beach pass policy? Yeah, you know what I mean? Like there's a difference between make sure that the audit integrity is good and that we're safe versus policy elections.
I think that then it becomes a Board of Finance recommendation, not an edict. You know what I mean? It's like, we believe that this will be a problem for the fiscally responsible of our town or the fiscal health of our town. So this is what we believe should happen for an addition or a cut. And it could be the other way around. We're spending too much money and we need to rail it in. You know what I'm saying? So
I think we've got to be careful not to, we've got to checks and balances with these two boards. On the Board of Ed side, it's state law that we can only do bottom line. There's no line item power at all. But that's state law. That's why we do it. And in the last 20 years or 15 years, we've never cut the education budget. It's become so controversial. The board has not felt like they could.
well, they did the last budget.
How about say last year got cut?
Oh, it did.
Yeah.
Oh, that was because of the state money, correct? Wasn't that
Well,
the new?
it was still a cut. I mean, we've always depended on what we're getting from the state. We never know when we're doing it. But anyway, I want to get back to this because this is the point of friction between the two boards. One board makes a policy, they put in the budget, this is what the policy is needed. The next board comes out and says, nope, we disagree, we're taking it out, and then that policy can't be implemented. And I think that I understand the fiscal health piece, but there are safeguards in between, reserves, there's regulations around reserves, there's regulations around unfunded balance and things like that. I think that somewhere along the way, the operating budget needs to be owned by the Board of Selectmen, not the Board of Finance.
Well, actually, the Board of Finance is the authority of the budget.
So
They're the budget authority. I just think, look, I'm a former selectman. I've never served on the Board of Finance, but I think people in town like that checks and balances. They just like the idea that more people are looking at it. Working out the line item issues with the Board of Selectmen and Board of Finance, maybe we should need to address that. But I just think it's so important that we have checks and balances.
We do, and there are elections as well. If people are not feeling that things are going the way they wanted to, they vote people out. So I think that.
Well, we're changing that though, unfortunately now. We're changing that with taking 4 years.
Well, I mean, so the Board of Finance can ride roughshod for 4 years, but the Board of Selectmen has to keep getting reelected every 2 years. That's not a good balance either. That's not really a check and balance.
So I guess the way that I would argue it. So I don't think going toward a bottom line total budget number like the Board of Ed is I think that's a very big tool to solve the problem. But I want to totally agree with you that there's a problem. So because, as I've said before, and, I wasn't really kidding that as Board of Finance chair, there was just a lot of ruckus you could create when you can control each individual line item and under some interpretations can shut down accounts mid-year from operating pieces. That means you are the first selectman, which I don't think is the intention of this at all. So I think clarifying the roles is a really, really good idea. I just, in shaping the budget, I've just seen, frankly, a lot of things that would have been inconsistent with my role on Board of Finance to vote for. And I've got examples I think were problematic. So that's why I wouldn't want to go all the way down or make a recommendation. By the way, the equal, it's true, right? When I was a selectman, and when Noreen and I were on the same board, I'm sure we could have raised a lot of ruckus in reverse with the Board of Finance, right? We need to clarify this. I don't want to imply that either side was terribly angelic. It just didn't happen that much because people basically know each other.
I remember the most ruckus being that I know of is when you were head of Board of Finance, Joe, as I recall.
Oh, I think if we think about it, you'll realize that I was an entertaining ruckus, but there was problems before that, clearly.
No, there were, and we do want to straighten it out. I think I keep saying the same words, but check and balances is so important, and that's why we have these two boards.
So could I suggest that we split the conversation into two buckets and see if this is okay. First, let's discuss the process for how we create the budget. And then something that I think is perhaps subtler, but I think also important, but Joan might be something that we could also would help a lot. We should discuss what happens in the execution of the budget, because I think those problems are distinct. We have the budget process, and then there's the stuff during it. And maybe if we divide the conversation that way, it'll be easier to think about the board. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, we can try, but it all comes down to, quite honestly, that the final few meetings of the Board of Finance, where they can, I feel like there were things that have been cut that it was not because of value proposition or we can't afford it. We have almost 20% in undesignated fund balance in reserve. So, we can afford a lot. It's a matter of what are the priorities. And I think that the Board of Selectmen is elected for the priorities, and the Board of Finance is elected for the viability of the health, the financial health. I think that gets lost.
But Joan, I'll use that as an example. The selectmen came in, you might have been not even on the board, selectmen then. You came in with land next to the senior center. You came in with a proposal, you had a good reason you wanted to take it. And the Board of Finance that Joe chaired at the time voted against it. And I think it was based on the potential price tag of the land.
Yes.
Somebody suggested the price. But I thought
it was the $300 bocce courts instead of, oh no, we have land and a building and things like that. So it was all the way it was presented. And quite honestly, there wasn't a thought that this was going to be anything but approved prior to the Board of Selectmen sending it over. Otherwise, we would have shown up and talked about it a little bit more. It was kind of a no-brainer. Fillmore went in, and there were 60 people sitting there in the Board of Finance meeting saying, do not do it. And Board of Finance said no. And it wasn't because of fiscal health. It was because there were 60 people in the room.
Well, I think one of the big points was the cost of it. Someone was saying was overpriced, whatever. So right away, money came into it. But it got voted down, and the selectmen did not bring it back again, which I was surprised.
Yeah, so that, if I could, that one, to be honest, because it's come up a couple of times, that was a particularly interesting vote and an easy one to take, because one of the questions was the town was buying land, and the question was, which frankly Joan had been on the table and they'd been prepped for days before the meeting, was why? Because people were opposed to it and they wanted to know why the town was spending money, and the answers were imprecise. So
when it was in front of the Board of Selectmen, it was pretty precise. There was an expansion, there was a plan, it had a presentation by the senior center, and that addition could be have said, okay, we're going from a senior center to a community center on the $300,000
And
mark versus, and I'm not saying that it, we could have brought it up, but once it was shot down the first time, I don't think the buyers wanted to talk again. So
Yeah. So
it couldn't have gone back again. And this was the whole thing. It's like, this is something that could have just gone to referendum and everybody could have voted on it, but it was stopped by the Board of Finance prior to going to a referendum.
Right. So, yeah, so again, just to hover on that for one sec, that's all great, but I remember the meeting very clearly. The justification for the purchase didn't make it into the Board of Finance meeting, which was problematic. And I think maybe one of our questions has to be, first of all, one thing, looking at it today, the total amount of money was in the hundreds of thousands, I think.
Mhm.
Given, as you pointed out, the 20% fund reserve and where we are today, does that need necessarily to even go through the whole process for what's a fairly small purchase? If you really look at the size of our operation, we hamstrung land, do we need a different process for it? So right now, first things first, if I could, I'm sorry just to stick on the budget process, but I do think if we can clarify it, I think it would help. I'd propose that A read something that requires consultation like any other business, that would say that the Board of Finance first receives proposed budgets, from the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Ed. And from that time, then holds hearings to shape and create a combined budget. Does that sound all right so far?
Well, it's not a combined budget. Remember, we have two budgets.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Well, to form the budget of the town.
Mhm.
So what's confusing me is my understanding is that a number of the people who've testified see that the role of the Board of Finance is not the same as the role of the Board of Selectmen. The role is to look at the budget in terms of affordability, fiscal prudence, etc., not policy preferences. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I think
so.
I do think part of another part of it too, if I could, the opposite part of that is that it's the Board of Selectmen particularly the first selectman, to operate the town and not the Board of Finance. That's why I keep separating the budget approval versus the operation. There's been discussions in the past also about current operations of the town. What's the role of the Board of Finance once the budget's approved?
Right, but they have an impact prior to the budget being approved on the future of the operating budget, because if they do line item cuts that the Board of Selectmen deem necessary, there is no coming back from that.
Yeah, no, one thing.
That's why I like the idea of the holistic, and it's like, okay, guess what? They cut our budget $500,000, let's say, throwing out a number, $100,000, 200, whatever. Do we really need this new proposal that's costing 200, or do we scrimp and scrape up from other departments and save and do it that way?
But I think when the Board of Finance or the town votes something down, we can always go back. Look what we do with our high school. The first vote went down. We did with our library. The first vote went down. We do go back. And I think you can do that with the Board of Selectmen too, with a better case. To me, when I got involved with this budget, with this charter review group and really looked at the charter in more detail, the idea that this committee is the budget authority for the town said a lot to me, because it doesn't go into much detail.
No.
But I think A should start off with that, and how we want it to look, if you want to get them away from policy and whatever. But the Board of Selectmen members represent the residents, but so do the Board of Finance members. And I think they're speaking from what they've heard from people, where they think we should be with spending or money or projects or whatever, depending which board it is. But as I've only been a selectman, and I did find it frustrating. I can remember one time going in. Actually, I was on Beach and Rec, and I went in. We were buying a new stove for the surf club, and a Board of Finance member started to question me on the type of stove we were buying. That to me was a Board of Finance member that didn't understand their role. But
Matt,
well,
yeah.
you know, that used to happen. Maybe it still does.
that I'm very sensitive to see if we can correct certainly that at the very least. Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, so I've been quiet because a lot of this is new to me, and I appreciate the experience that you guys have. You know, when we talk about checks and balances system, I don't see a lot of checks and balances because the Board of Finance has so much power over this. And I just don't see it the other way around too. And so I want to question, is it the proper way that the Board of Finance has the final say over the budget? Or should should they be responsible? The budgets, proposed budgets from the Selectmen and Board of Education come to them. They do their tweaking, you know, they're aggregating and tweaking, and then it goes back to Board of Selectmen for the final to say. Because in my mind, the Board of Selectmen should say what we're going to be spending on, and the Board of Finance says how. So should we rethink this, or does it have to be this way?
Well, one question is, you know, do we need a Board of Finance?
Yes. Good
Like,
question.
what's its function?
Well, when you answer Matt's question, that is the question I was thinking of too. Do we need a Board of Finance then?
Yeah, because if the Board of Selectmen are doing it, arguably the Board of Finance is now an audit committee, you know, or something like that.
Yeah.
Liz, go ahead. You've got your hand up.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's exactly where I was coming to, quite frankly, because I'm having literally just gone through our budget process right now at work. I'm trying to understand what the role is, because, you know, looking at the plan that the town has, and that obviously the selectmen needs to be aware of what the strategic plan and the priorities, and yeah, so I'm just trying to wrap my head around what exactly is the role of the finance committee.
So if that's the case, then is there another way that we could have some kind of auditing or checks and balances that doesn't involve a Board of Finance?
So the things that because having sat on all the boards, the things that concern me is that I've seen selectmen make decisions, well-meaning decisions, that are addressing the reserves, underfunding the capital improvement plan. It's been suggested to me to reduce the pension benefit payment, you know, things that are generating immediate tax savings that would be counterintuitive to the long-term balances. And characterizing those and preventing that type of thing, to my mind, is good. It's the balance between the short term and the long term.
Oh,
On the
we
other
just saw
hand,
this happen. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, you're probably going to feed into just what I'm thinking about. Is that on the flip side, we have, you know, what stove Noreen is buying, you know, what operational decision there is going on right now. The Board of Finance has incredible unrestricted power to get into operations in terms of exactly what you're buying. Where it shows up, by the way, Matt, is and one thing we can probably address, there's line item transfers. So you save a little money on personnel and you want to transfer it over to purchase equipment or something else, you know, $5,000, $10,000. You're coming to the Board of Finance, which means that expenditure on an $83 million budget, is that about where we are? Yep. That $5,000 gets a full hearing inter alia based on a savings that you did. And
Wow.
that procedure generates a lot of weirdness, and I think is not in anyone's doesn't trigger anyone's best instincts. And I claim no sanctity, saintliness in terms of that conversation. Could you kind of get into it? Like, tell me again now, how did you negotiate for the lease on the car? And now suddenly you're, you know, into nowhere zone.
But
So what you're saying though, that disincentivizes people to actually strive for cost savings then.
We did a
Good point,
fascinating.
Matt.
We did
So
a fascinating. Oh, go ahead, Nolan.
So
Joan.
the one other thing I just wanted to point out was that it's also can be the Board of Finance that does a short term. So for instance, all of the CIP, which under the Board of Finance's regulation should try to increase 3% each year, was frozen this year. And that was voted on by the Board of Finance, not the CIP committee, not the Board of Selectmen, but the Board of Finance. So to get to a number for tax increase, or you know, the mill rate increase. So I think that it can happen on different
Sure,
sides.
that's a
And I
very good
think that,
point.
you know, I think that Matt's point is perfectly fit, because one of the things I was going to do when it talked about the department heads, I think the department heads shouldn't have, if that's their budget, if they want to move money around, great. They want to save, that's their budget. If they don't do it responsibly, it will show pretty evidently when you're doing your review of the next year and saying, why did you have such a shift? Was there something that was needed? Was there something there? Are you just padding this account? That kind of thing. So I think that there's, you know, because you have the actuals versus what was budgeted, so to speak, when you're starting to look through the budget cycle.
One of the things that was super revealing was at some point in time on my term somewhere along the line, we did a form fitting analysis where we took each account and looked at its actual ending balance per year for several years and drew the curve between proposals. And what we saw was different than what you might think. We didn't find the overfunding of most accounts. We had some notable exceptions where accounts were fatter than expenditures. What we found was the underfunding of accounts all over the place, and we had to fatten them. And they were things like private engineering expenses, copier expense, things where department heads had been trying to reduce their budget under the process in a way that it wasn't reality. Because what would happen is that they would then come for there would be budget shortfalls and we'd be doing transfers. I mean, ideally, your form fit on your budget should reflect your operation plus some margin as closely as possible, right, for account design. And it was surprising. It was not what you expected. We ended up, whatever the incentives of our current structure, department heads, I think, doing their best, were trying to spend as little as possible in a way that meant that periodically the accounts would get blown and you'd have to move things around.
You know, Joe, can I just, granted, I was a selectman a long time ago, but even before that, I was Beach and Rec 9 years. There was a mentality, and I mean, if it's gone, great. Mentality is we've got to spend what's in this budget, this line item, or we're going to lose it next year. Because when you go sit down and look at actuals and what your budget, and you see a lot of extra money, maybe we don't have to budget so much next year. But I remember hearing that from staff years ago, some capital items, but also some operational line items that we've got to spend it or we'll lose it. So all of a sudden you saw people doing things at the end of the year, end of the fiscal year, that was, sort of a catch up. So
at some point in time, and I don't want to suggest to talk about this now because I don't want to lose the big issue and I don't want to move away from Joan's issue that's it's coming to, but that operating inter budget cycle operation and authority, I think that we could do a lot of good to empowering the town to spend the money budgeted by segment without too much interference. Some exceptions: if you save money on copiers and you hire somebody, you've created a multi-year financial obligation through a person. That's not the same thing if you use it to contract. You know what I mean? Like, I'm sure we can come up with a short list of things that don't require continuing expenditures. But I think that would probably do a lot of good. Noreen would, maybe I hadn't thought about it until you just said this. Maybe there'd be some way of saying, and any surplus could be carried over for the for operational expenditures for the first 90 days of the fiscal year or something like that. So there'd be some incentive. Lauren's head just went up, so maybe there's like an immediate problem with that.
Well,
I don't know the GASB rules. It could be that we have issues with that.
Lauren, are we allowed nowadays? Does a department head, can they encumber money after June 30th?
So we encumber money, but the goods and services have to have been incurred prior to the end of the fiscal year. So they can't carry over any, we used to do it. We used to encumber money at the end of the fiscal year for things that were like skirting the 2 fiscal years. And then we would pay them with the prior fiscal year PO. But the auditors came back and said to us, the state no longer allows that. It has to be incurred and billed in the proper fiscal year.
Exactly.
I mean,
So-
we have outside auditors that come in and review our books annually. Correct me if I'm wrong, Lauren?
Yeah, sure. We do
Yeah.
an annual report like everybody else.
Mhm.
One of the other things Bob, Matt, and Liz, it may not be obvious, is that at the end of one of the things the Board of Finance votes on, so we get the budget, we vote the budget, then we get it approved. And then the next thing we're going to vote on is the change of the mill rate. So that might be confusing because you say, well, you know the mill rate, you know what the taxpayer base is, and you know what the budget is. Except for the budget surplus, you have a decision to make. Either A, you're going to then put it into the undesignated fund balance. That's what Joan was talking about with the 20%. B, as frankly was an innovation, I'd like to give a little credit to Fillmore. He put a bias, it wasn't legal, but it's sort of an operational bias into paying down the pension, as to through doing an extra pension expense. His argument at the time was that is one of the few accounts where the town makes money in the market. The more pension expense you get, the more it grows over time. You reduce it builds on itself. Another place that we put money is into the CIP for capital improvement projects to help fund those areas. But a very frequent use, and this is the one I wanted to highlight, is to put it as a tax rebate. So if you had $2 million extra, you would return it to the taxpayer. And the argument being, hey, it's your money, taxpayer. We taxed you on it. We didn't spend it. You get it back. One of the problems with that is it becomes a little bit like a drug, because what it means is your taxes went up 1% this year. Great. Then next year, if you don't have the $2 million and the budget increased, 3% each year, suddenly you're getting a 6% increase. So the board tends to try and find ways to increase the rebate to reduce taxes. Joan, you had your hand up.
Yeah, that's what it's not, I want to be clear. It's not a rebate where we send checks back to taxpayers. It's a rebate that
It's a reduction of the
reduces
taxes.
a reduction of the next year's tax.
Yeah.
That's all the clarification. I wanted to say.
Though actually we can rebate if we wanted to. So they could, that is a power they have. But they're artificially decreasing the next budget through the surpluses of the prior budget. But since taxpayers feel the net change, it's an issue. And one operational question we might want to have is, should that decision be solely in the hands of the Board of Finance, the group that's judged on the increase of the tax rate? Because for me, that's a moment that can lead to some of the uses of funds are very good for the town in the long term. Some can be used to decrease items that shouldn't be decreased, and the desire to then get that money can lead to some very big decisions.
Joe, can I ask you a question about the point with, as I recall, the last few years, it's been about 800,000 they've infused into the new budget from the general fund, correct? About 800,000, I believe, each year.
I'm unsure in recent years.
I think there were years that I remember it was only like 300, whatever, but it was 800.
I remember much bigger numbers in some years.
I don't remember
There
anything.
were zero sometimes, but
It was zero sometimes, you're right. But I've lost my question now. Let me just think for a minute. Oh, shoot. So obviously, like Joan said, we don't give checks back, but this just comes off the budget each time. To me, that definitely is a Board of Finance decision. When I was a selectman, and I don't know when this changed, but the Board of Selectmen never made a decision or a proposal, whatever you want to call it, on what was going to come out of the general fund. That was done by the Board of Finance. That now is done by the Board of Selectmen. And I don't know when that change occurred.
I believe that changed with Fillmore, where he would make
Yeah.
recommendations.
Okay, it's been for a
Yep.
while. It's been for several years, but I was not around when we were doing it. But that alone is a change, that you've got a board of selectmen presenting a budget that already includes a piece that normally would be done by your finance people.
Yeah. Well, I think there's an element to saying, hey, look, in this budget, we passed X, we have an extra $500,000.
Yeah.
You know, we know there are further capital expenditures to come in the future. Take this money, put it in now. It'll save the taxpayers money in the long term.
I agree, but it's just shows you one more gray area between these two boards.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I think we've gotten no farther than A. So how do you want to think about it? I mean, let's go back to the Matt question on, what are we doing with it? Or was it Liz?
I think one of the things, if I could say, B, enact regulations implementing policies within the jurisdiction, but the jurisdiction is never defined. And it's not defined at the state level, really. It's kind of like, it's one of the more wishy-washy areas. So I think if we can clear up B, that, or tighten that up, or make it more, the jurisdiction of the Board of Finance is that,
So if I could,
Mhm.
I'd like to float the idea of eliminating B entirely.
Eliminating what?
The idea that the Board of Finance should create regulations implying that they have enforcement power, as opposed to them just being an approval body for the budget. Because I'm colored by scarred experience. I saw the board trying to justify decisions based on what would have been a prior board's regulations. When you're an elected official, if you guys were elected to the Board of Finance tomorrow and you saw something you thought was bad for the town, you're not going to rely on a prior Board of Finance's regulation to restrict you. And also, some of those regulations were inherently operational. Lauren, I'm wondering if at our next meeting, if we could just maybe take a quick eyeball, or if they're online. I think if we saw those regulations, we might be surprised.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Bob. I'm sorry.
No, I'm just saying, what are the regulations that the Board of Finance has enacted that set implementation policies? I don't know what the answer is. So
Well,
it
one
would
of
be
the big
really nice
is
to see that.
One of the big ones is how much we want in our general fund, a minimum of, it used to be, I don't know if it still is 10% of our budget. A lot of their regulations actually have come from audits, things that's been recommended by auditors. But these are all, I didn't know they had anything to do with policies outside of the finances of the town, though. I wasn't aware of that.
No,
Is there
it seems
somewhere
to me
that we
that
can-
just, I really like the idea of, to me, the clarification of the Board of Finance is that the checks and balances that need to be provided are in auditing and oversight function.
Yeah, that's,
Right.
that,
Not a policy making.
Can I recommend that before the next meeting, Lauren send out the Board of Finance regulations to all of us so we can read it ahead of time and be prepared with some questions, and just so that we get an understanding of what it looks like?
Yeah. So I mean, I just to have a little fun, because I can't help myself. The procedure for approving a lease. We need the rationale for the lease, the length, the lease document, including non-appropriation of funds clause, the liability and warranty statements. I mean, aren't those things negotiated by the selectmen ahead of time? To approve anything for beach and rec, you need the liability exposure. Any program that's expected to exceed 20,000 in revenue shall be considered a major program reviewed by the Board of Selectmen prior to implementation. I mean, there's a lot of things here in what is I'm guessing about maybe 30-page document or so. No, I take it back. It's about 30 pages of regulations. For the initial appropriation for total capital projects are limited at 91,000. I mean, so there's a kind of a piece to this where I'm not 100% sure I wasn't once upon a time sure as to the value of a regulatory structure under a Board of Finance.
Because
But
if
doesn't-
the auditors do a recommendation, wouldn't it be the finance department that should implement those recommendations now? I mean, we do have a full,
Yeah, just so we're clear, this is completely separate from how Stacy
Okay.
operates, right? These
Right.
are limitations on capital expenditures and requests. So even what can be requested that the Board of Finance puts upon everyone that interacts with them.
okay,
And I'm just not, in my thinking, I'm not sure, frankly, the political status of this. I mean, if you're elected to the board, you're not going to vote for something you don't believe is good for the town just because it's written in some reg, or what the enforceability of it is. And it looks to me like these type of things, if we all got together and were the Board of Finance and voted on a regulation that said, no request shall be approved without Board of Finance approval in excess of $2,000. Okay. So now you're changing what the Board of Selectmen can spend through your regulatory power.
right.
I kind of think that whatever it is, the rules should be few and in the charter and not set to create.
But
So
these are not town, these are Board of Finance regulations for themselves, correct? That they've set up for their due diligence. And it's 30 pages long. I agree with you, Joe. It looks like they've got to be reviewed.
well,
That's not the charter.
yeah, let's take a look at them, because I think when you're looking at lease requirements and things, in order to get the Board of Finance to approve something, then you need to follow their regulations, or no soup for you. So that's kind of how the whole
If
thing
you're going
looks.
to stick the town with their 20-year lease or something, I want to know they're getting involved a little bit, wouldn't you?
Oh, I'm not having a problem with the board, going in and approving things. That's fine. But understand that through the regulatory power, we can create, if we're the Board of Finance, we can create our authority. So,
Yeah.
right, I
Yeah.
adopt a regulation that says to relieve any expenditure for a piece of electronic equipment in excess of $1,500, I wish to see you in front of the Board of Finance. That's a regulatory requirement that now attaches itself to the budget. So before you relieve your technology budget line item, town operator, you now need to go and get clearance through the Board of Finance. Now, what if I do this for, I don't know, police car, gasoline? My point is the regulatory authority is a way that the Board of Finance can reach into operations. And it's not through the budget, it's the other side.
Okay.
So take a look at them, maybe see if, if I'm too close to it, if you have a different impression. But
If
they're
we're
right on
going
the
to-
town website.
They're going this deep into it. Do you think we should have Stacy here?
I'd love to have Stacy here, see what she has to say.
But just for some,
I never served on it. I think you're the only one here that has, Joe. It's
Yeah, it's only because you talked me into it, Noreen. I haven't forgotten.
talked to it. It was a big favor.
actually,
I owe you
just for some levity, Lauren, what was the story behind trying to divest the ugly couches at town campus, and what were the problems with that?
Did we lose her?
No, I'm here. I'm here. No, it was the ugly chairs.
Chairs.
Because they, as an inventory, they were inventoried as one item, and that is over a certain amount of money. So we have to go to both boards for approval before we can get rid of them.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess one of my concerns is that whatever we decide should be the limitation of the board, the regulatory power can undo us. And I don't know anything else like this. The Board of Selectmen doesn't have regulations like this, right? They just function through ordinance. Am I right on that, Lauren?
They have policies. The Board of Selectmen have policies.
Yeah.
Yeah, but policies are different than regulations.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's one thing to be policy or a Board of Finance policy, because that's just, okay, this is kind of how we try to do things, versus regulation is you got to do it, period, end of sentence. Hard stop.
So let's take a look. Noreen, I think you'll find the Beach and Rec activities account. I'm sure there was a really good reason for each of these when they were enacted. I just don't know that this type of rulemaking is the way to get the type of clarity that we're after.
Mhm.
It's
So-
not clear that these are financial either, entirely.
I mean, they are. Noreen's asked the right question, like, well, wait a minute. If I had to approve a lease, it makes sense that your Board of Finance might approve a lease. It's a long-term obligation. You might want another set of eyes
Okay,
on
that's an
something.
auditing type of.
Those things.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean,
It's auditing
that-
all
that
the
I-
sites, that makes sense.
I get that too, but I think that there's a time, like, to me, the time for that is after you don't preset the restrictions around the lease, because
you
there
go.
may be a justification for the way you're doing the lease that supersedes like just the financial impact, and say, okay.
So let me give you one more example. If any of you are looking at it, section 7 is grants over on page 11. And it's the type of thing that, frankly, we used to ask all the time. And when I sat in the chair, I never thought twice about it. But decision to pursue external funding. Does the funding provide equipment and services related to health or public safety? Okay, I guess. Well, all I know is the department said they wanted to go for a grant. Does it provide recreational expense? Does the funding add to staff workload? Well, you're kind of hoping that the department had worked that part out. I mean, it's a good question. There's nothing wrong with it. Does the funding place restrictions on the town? That's fair. But a lot of these are outside of the funding thing, as you sort of look at it. Does the funding imply endorsement of any business or product by the town of Madison? I kind of think the selectmen in voting for the grant should have looked at that. It's just a lot of nothing is poorly intended or inappropriate. It's just, should this be regulatory and functioned at the Board of Finance level?
Got it.
I want to be sensitive to the fact we're at 6:23, and I think Joan has a birthday hard stop at 6:30, and I want to make sure we stick the landing.
Yeah.
Well,
Sorry about that, guys.
Oh, please. First things first, do we have our next meeting scheduled?
We do not. And the other thing that we need to review is the public hearing date. Joan had sent us an email that there is a town event that evening. And I'd also like to point out that since the last time you guys met, the Planning and Zoning Commission has decided to hold a public hearing that evening on the potential marijuana sale and permitting moratorium. So
I am sure the charter review will grossly attract more people than a discussion of marijuana. I believe that this is
Just by our attendees here tonight, beyond our panelists, we can say that with confidence.
I am always an optimist. Lauren, would you like to propose an alternative date?
So you guys had also floated doing it the following Thursday, the 28th of October. So if you guys just want to move back 1 week, everyone I think was available that day as well.
Actually, Lauren, unfortunately, I sent back, I'm going to be at a wedding outside the country. So unfortunately, I will not be able to.
Okay.
Sorry. Yeah, I sent that the first time. And I think since it landed on the 21st, I figured, okay, great. Not a problem.
Do you want to try?
You going for the whole week, Liz?
Yeah, I'm leaving the 26th, and we don't come back until the 2nd of November.
Don't forget your absentee ballot if you're going to be in flight.
No, I'll be home. I'll be home to vote.
Okay.
How about, and I think given the fact that my dream of getting a view of the finish line, isn't that the analogy I used at the beginning, was I sensed the Board of Finance, Board of Selectmen conversation might lead to a little more chit chat. And that's good. Maybe we should consider moving a little later even. Would we want to look at, say, the 11th? Does that not work for everyone?
You're talking about the 11th of November?
I am.
It's a holiday.
The 11th is
Veterans
Day.
Of course.
How's our 4th?
But wait a minute, Veterans Day, do we have anything, but all the festivities, everything's during the day, can we do it at night?
We're closed, so I would rather not do it on my day off.
What, Lauren?
Oh, come on.
Oh, Lauren, first it's
Chuck.
marijuana, now it's staying
Chuck,
home.
I mean, this is,
Jeez.
Jeez, I mean,
Oh my,
staff
what is
support here
this?
issues is
So tough.
difficult.
Well, let's,
Well, what about the 4th? You say,
the 4th works for me.
I'm just gonna check the town calendar. I don't have anything on the
I
office
wouldn't be able to do it on the 4th because of work.
Could I ask, are Monday nights more attractive to anyone? Unfortunately, Tuesdays we were meeting, are shut down for me. My teaching schedule has changed. So I'm out of pocket Tuesday and Wednesday nights. Unless you all want to come to con law, I think I should. I do talk about charter review in class. You guys should come.
yeah, I took a year's course in con law.
Yeah.
How about November 8th? Going Mondays.
At a
Fine
Board of
with me.
Selectmen meeting?
Lauren, is that a selectmen's meeting? The 8th? No.
Nope.
Is that
I
date
could do the 8th.
I can
works
do
for
the
me?
8th. Yep.
I can do the 8th.
Same here.
Okay.
Now,
So-
this is the public hearing we're talking about.
Correct.
Yes. So let's double check, Lauren, if you don't mind, before you lock it, check in with
Yep.
Dave, because if you remember, he had to leave at 5:45. And if he can do it, then are we setting ourselves up for public hearing failure? Will people come to a Monday evening public hearing?
I don't think that makes a difference Monday or Wednesday, Thursday, or I don't think that matters.
No.
Unless it was Friday or Saturday, I don't think it would matter.
Well,
If we
May-
promise something fun,
we'll
Maybe
tell
we
people
should
that we're
merge.
discussing.
maybe we should merge with the planning and zoning discussion on.
We'll
Or
announce
we
this
could
as
also
a,
we could say that we want to put marijuana into the charter.
that's
I
it.
like the way you think.
We're going to be
We could
the
have all samples. We could have tables with samples that night. Why don't
Yeah.
we do that?
that we'll rename ourselves just for that evening, the Cannabis Review Committee. And
Okay.
I'm sure the CRC will then attract sufficient attention.
Joe, you've lost control of this group entirely. You realize.
I think that
Not that you ever had it, but it's
I
think-
gone.
I think the diligence of this group is unparalleled. So let's try the 8th if that works.
Okay, and then the next meeting.
Yeah, so we are, let's see, hold on. Sorry, I'm sitting in November. Do we want to try the 30th or the 7th?
I cannot do the 7th because we have a Board of Selectmen CIP workshop that night.
You're now in, are you in December now?
No,
October.
we're talking the next meeting.
Yeah, so I was in,
December
I was in
September 30th or
What month? The 7th?
September 30th.
The 7th is October and the 30th is September.
Yeah, I couldn't do the 7th, but I could, like as Lauren said, there's already a board of selectmen meeting, but I could do the 30th.
I can do either.
Yeah, I don't think I can do the 30th. Unfortunately, I've got a work event.
Well,
I
then
can do the 30th. I may not be in good shape. I'm getting my second shingles shot and everybody says that's a real killer sometimes.
I just had a second. It
just
wasn't, it was nothing,
trouble.
but that was.
Okay, cool.
do we want, so following the same theme then, do we want to move out to the 14th? Does that
I
work
will
for-
be in Boston celebrating a friend's 60th birthday. Sorry, can't do that one.
All right. So
I'm not available on the 14th either.
reverting to Monday,
4th, sorry, another work event.
you need to stop working, Liz.
I
know,
It's destroying our charter review life.
Yeah.
So following forward to the October then 11th.
It's Columbus Day.
Come on,
Oh.
start.
Well, there we go.
Maybe you should do a doodle poll, Joe.
Yeah, I think
Do a full doodle.
well, or we're going to have to just do our best with meetings. Who was unavailable on the 30th?
Liz.
Liz.
Me.
Well, Lauren, why don't you, if you wouldn't mind staying off Tuesdays and Wednesdays, and see if we can find a Monday. Oh, let me ask you another question. Is this group amenable to a morning meeting if we did it early enough? No, that doesn't work.
I could.
I can most mornings, but
Yeah.
I'm flexible.
Yeah, I on Thursdays and Mondays, day dependent, I'm reasonably flexible. Well, Lauren, why don't you try and doodle poll one out, and we'll just have to do our best and see if we can schedule meetings.
Okay.
All right. So
And
I
do a
would
full
ideally,
doodle
if I had my preference, since this conversation is somewhat complex, I'd love to meet in the next 2 weeks, just because
Yeah.
I want to keep a little bit of momentum. And
Makes
even if
sense.
we're suboptimal in attendance, then, we'll just try and not make sure the same people don't get knocked out for the following meeting.
Okay.
Okay.
Sorry, guys, I gotta go.
No, you
Have fun,
do.
Joe.
Thanks.
See you later.
Take care. Bye.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Thank you, everyone. This is a good
Read with us
Thank you.
conversation.
tonight, Joe.
Sorry.
Thank you.
See you guys.